Today we're going to take a little tour of the old dairy barn, get this history down while it still stands. So this was one of the first buildings built on the property, along with the chicken barn and the granary, which I'm standing next to, constructed in 1917. It originally just stood, the footprint was where the peaks were. We're on the west side, I'm walking to the north side. So I'll throw some pictures in as we go here of some of the things that were constructed, like when the silo came in, and some of the pictures to reference some of the changes. One notable change over the years from when this was originally constructed, we're still using draft horses and working horses up into the 30s, late 30s. I think they might have still been around. Latest picture I seen was like 1940. So before this was added onto, you see that track that runs, it's still there. And you'll notice that this door is still there, but it's cut way down. This used to be open. So I'll show you a picture. So you would roll that door over before the feed mill was added on and everything. And on this has been the horse stable. And this is where you'd put loose hay up. So we'll go on the other side. So now we're on the other side of where that door would have opened back in its day when it was full size. That would have slid open. This would have been open to that wall. And as we look up, we'll notice we have mill cut lumber, regular, whatever, 2x6s. But if we go to that last frame, we're back to logs. As we back up, when we look over here, we're back to logs. And the logs run to the length where the barn would have ended originally before it was added onto. So you could see that this was all open to the haymow, and this was the horse stable. And to this day, the working horses' names are still on the beam. Pretty cool. They've been up there since, I don't know, 100 years. So you can see it's bumped out here. This was added on, I'm not exactly sure. I have to check with Dad. And there's a feed room here on the front. It's this first door. And then this is the milk house. So when they switched to grade A milk, you had to have a vestibule. And this thing's changed. You had to go with the program. All right, walking through the barn with Dad, he can give us a little tour of how this went down. So we started over here. This was the first 6.
These 8 would have been the first ones.
So coming in from the front where I walked in, we have steel pipe for the stanchions. And then the back side is wood, so that's later. So we're saying we had 8 on this first row first.
And then 4 more were added on this side.
And this is the bump out, because the original wall where the barn stood, this beam would have been the end of it. And so they added on and pushed it out. So you had milked 8 originally, right?
Yes.
And then
they added 4. And they used to access the milk house through this side out of the barn.
So they had a door going right here, and that would have been where there was the original water pump too.
And then later on, when they went to grade A milk, then they added 2 more stalls here, I believe, and had to have a vestibule. You had to have, you couldn't go directly from the barn into the milk house, and you had to have a room in between. So then the access to the milk house was changed. There was an addition put on the front of the barn to get you to the milk house.
About what time was that?
Late 50s, I would say.
We'll take a little walk and see where the that was the entrance to the front, and then to the right.
This was the old entrance to the milk house right here.
There's the door on the back side. So the bulk tank stood right here. And this has kind of just turned into a workshop since then. And you said there was an original cooler before the regular?
We had just bought a new can cooler. They were state of the art at the time. But then grade A milk came along and they didn't have it long, and they switched to bulk.
The old wash sink.
Back in the 20s.
Yeah, back in the 20s is when the first milkers were in on this first half. So the barn ain't set up great for cows. Like typically milking, you'd have one straight run. Here's the cow yard. You come in around the corner. We walk to what would have been horse stables at one point here, or hay storage. We got another 8.
These were added probably in the late 40s, early 50s. Probably in the 40s, I would guess.
I'm gonna come around.
And then there were 8 more added here. The barn used to end at these beams here.
Yep, covered some of that in another part of this clip where that was open. You can see where the
So then we had
timbers.
8 here that we would throw by hand into the other gutter with one barn cleaner. We had an acorn barn cleaner that would clean that side. And then in 1967, when eggs got cheap, we sold all the chickens and put our straw in the chicken barn, and this lean on the barn was where we kept our straw. We closed that in and added 8 more stalls and put another barn cleaner in. That was our last expansion. 1967 that was.
So you said that you guys hand dug these gutters?
Yep, I remember starting to dig these gutters by hand in this June. And we worked part-time the rest of the year, putting in the barn cleaner, adding the stalls, cementing everything out in this lean. And yeah, like I said, that was our last expansion then. We didn't put cows here until November.
Then
Then we had room for 38 cows at that time.
38 milking. And then that chute would go out here. This was a Pat's cleaner. I touch on that on the other clip.
And then this lean out here was just storage for machinery. We actually made that into a holding pen, a maternity pen, and we ran a few extra cows.
So Grandpa milked and you stayed on and took it over. When did you take on the milking?
Well, I helped all my life. In the late 70s, I worked out for a few years and farmed besides, and in 1980 I quit my job and went in partnership with Dad. And in 1989 I took over. And I milked cows until 2003. We sold the cows. Dad passed away 3 weeks after we sold the cows. And then I just raised heifers for a couple of years, and then I went to strictly beef. It was a more stable market than the heifers were.
So then on up until what, the late 90s, it was step saver and conveyor?
Yes, we had the hoses are still up on the ceiling, where we'd tee into it. We had a tee right here.
Where is it right?
I've since switched them to water lines for watering the cattle. And then in 1997, we decided to put a pipeline milker in here, which was quite a challenge because of the layout of the barn with 5 different rows. My father-in-law retired that year and he helped. We put it in ourselves. We bought the pipeline from a local farmer and we used that for 7 years. It worked real well till we were done.
So being it was split like this, there's 2 barn cleaner systems in here too. This one being just your typical oval. See where the gutters are? That was a Pat's cleaner. Just went in a circle, dumped out the chute. The other one, the gutters ran around underneath. back that way under that door and stopped there, and that was an acorn style cleaner. So it had paddles that would flip one way to go by, and then you reverse the motor and it would take a bite and haul it out the chute. Kind of a bizarre system. Look at some of the construction. It's just amazing how they built these things. So this has actual logs that are different diameters, and you can see they just cut them to fit, to square it up. It's like this one's a little bit bigger. I'm not sure what those are, if they're tamarack or what kind of logs they are. But that's what holds the floor up. Pretty amazing to think that they did all this without power tools. And this has a wooden frame, so I'm sure there's block or concrete under it. But think of it kind of like a Lincoln log set, where I got a baseboard that ran around the whole perimeter of it, and then they just cut it out where they needed to walk. And that was the whole foundation, the whole base. Here's a look at the silage room. The loader would dump it here. And then you usually use bushel baskets to walk it out. And slip in the manger here as you try to walk around the beams. Here's the south facing side. You'll notice on the south side here, the roof still has cedar shakes on it for shingles. And if you look at the silo, you'll see two separate markings on it. The lower part, that was the original height, and then they added onto it for more capacity sometime later on. It stands 40 foot tall. I've shown you this because I got some pictures that'll match right up with this. I'll throw in here now. They built a silo in the 30s, and it looks like it was my great-grandpa and my grandpa, and then a hired man or some friends. It's kind of interesting. They got a pulley and a bucket. My grandpa would have been, I think, I looked it up, I can't remember what year the picture was, but when I did the math, he would have been about 17. And if he was alive today, he'd be 101. So, pretty interesting. Here we're still on the south side. Goes into the cow yard. That's where all the cows went into the barn for milking for all those years. And here we have the last two. Guys made history, the last two ever on this property. Looking at this wall, how many years of rubbing and licking does it take to make the boards disappear? It must taste pretty good. Now we're up close to the other side of the silo. Kind of unusual that they use brick, kind of like a tile brick. And if we look up, we'll see that the original was better quality than the addition. The addition blocks are falling, and the original is still in good shape. So next we'll jump up in the haymow, which is my favorite part. It's just basically untouched. You can see all the architecture, all the pegs, and then we'll take a peek out that window. Now I'm up in the haymow, my favorite part of any barn, where you just get to see nothing's weathered. Time pretty much hasn't touched how this would have looked. You see these are all wooden pegged. Just imagine the fitting cut with hand tools that would go into making all this stand. And looking at some of these beams, they're obviously saw cut, but you don't see the circular saw marks in it. They're vertical, so it must have been milled on a bandsaw. So back in the dairy days, this would have been blown full of loose hay, and then you would just fork it down that chute to feed it in the mangers. And this window looks out into the cow yard, south side. Here's what's left of that sliding door. So that would have been open to the corner. Below that was the horse stable. And to about this beam is where the original floor would have started again. So that would have been all wide open. You take like a buck rake and push your hay in and use your track up there and your trolley to pull it up and dump it over here. I'm in the feed room now. Leave you with this final piece of history. Notes were sporadically written in this feed room door. Grandpa did that. Corn picking, October 14th, 61, 62, 63. When he got into the silo, what the year day it was. Even when some of the dogs died. So we'll definitely have to pull the boards or this door and hang it somewhere.
Yeah, the boy.